If you are upset with, for example, what ICE is doing right now, you should be mad at the people who are making those rules.
It seems like ICE has carte blanche to just racially profile. It's supported by the Supreme Court.
I'm not mad at the ICE agents. When ICE agents arrested people, did they know they were going to go to El Salvador?
It has to be a better option to go against what they're saying.
Hello and welcome to Platinum Politics. I'm your host Mace, and today we have another great debate for you. Today's debate night topic is whether or not police face too much scrutiny. On one side of this, we have On God I Love Water, who believes that they do not face too much scrutiny. And on the other side of this, we have DTV Tricks, who does believe that they face too much scrutiny, and more specifically that you should focus on giving scrutiny to those who create the laws rather than those that enforce the laws. Now in this debate, the focus was really on ICE more than police as a whole, and this is also prior to the Minneapolis incident where Renee Good was shot by an ICE officer and killed. So that is not a factor in this at all. But I feel like it was a pretty good discussion. I feel like it was pretty productive, but you are the judge. If you enjoy, like, comment, and subscribe, and if you want to come debate yourself, join the Discord server. The link's down in the description. But without further ado, it is debate night. And we are live on Platinum Politics. How are you fellas doing?
Doing all right. How are you, miss?
I'm doing good. Oh my god, my camera. Holy, I gotta fix that.
The quality of your camera is actually pretty solid.
It is. It's cool.
I saw it on the stream instantly. I knew it was cooked.
So, welcome to Platinum Politics Debate Night. Today, the topic is, do police face too much scrutiny in the United States? On God I Love Water believes that they do not, and maybe even that they deserve more. And DTV Tricks here believes that they're poor little babies and they're way too scrutinized. So, I guess to start off, we'll give it to DTV to explain how police are over scrutinized. Your 5 minutes starts now.
I can go?
Yeah, the thing starts.
All right, so
Your 5 minutes starts
police face way too much scrutiny in the United States. Lots of law enforcement agencies, especially the law enforcement agency ICE, or Immigration and Customs Enforcement, faces way too much criticism and people attacking them. We see people throwing rocks at ICE vehicles now. We see entire systems being developed to resist these law enforcement agencies. We see a huge amount of animosity growing for police departments. We see far extremist movements like defund the police starting to grow, and this belief that, police are this evil foreign force that is constantly imposing something people don't want on them. In reality, law enforcement provides safety and security. We don't make the rules, we're simply there to enforce it. If you are upset with how a law enforcement agency is doing something, for example, what ICE is doing right now, you should be mad at the people who are making those rules, not the people who are enforcing those rules. That's all I got.
All right. On God I Love Water, your 5 minute timer to defend why they do not get enough scrutiny starts now.
My position is very simple. When we look at the fundamentals of society, police are servants of the public. They are not servants of the state per se. Obviously, they are a state institution, but the point of that state institution is to protect those who live in that state. Officers should not be given this low standard when it comes to like how they behave just because they are just enforcing laws. Like, for example, when ICE is racially profiling Mexican immigrants, or people who aren't even immigrants, people who are natural-born citizens who happen to be Latino, or even just tan white dudes, that should be behavior that we heavily scrutinize. And I understand that the policy is made by those up top, but the problem is that these people are complying. When we look at, for example, Nazi Germany, and of course, it's an extreme example, but the point stands that when you look at Nazi Germany, we would put fault on the camp guards. Even though they are just law enforcement, they are just enforcing the policies of Nazi Germany, we would still fault them for committing a crime against humanity. So it's not simply just following orders. You can't just use that as an excuse when it comes to this sort of behavior. Additionally, movements like defund the police, I think, are justified in the sense that they don't want to defund the police and abolish them, or rather not do anything about crime. The whole argument for defund the police has been that we need to take funding away from our heavily militarized police, and we need to put it into making communities that don't want to that don't want to commit crime. The best way to prevent crime is to remove the incentive to commit crime, not create a larger police force or a more militarized one. And I would agree with you that we should place a lot of blame on the policymakers, but I think that by enforcing those policies, then I don't think we can call them this guilt-free, clean-handed institution, especially ICE. I yield my time.
All right. Very good opening statements. DTV, I will give you 5 minutes uninterrupted to respond to that, and then Water, I'll do the same for you, and then we'll open up. So 5-minute timer, DTV starts now.
So this whole belief that, deportations is necessary 100%, but this whole belief that, there's people are underqualified, these people are, in my opinion, don't hate the idiot who got hired, hate the idiot who hired them. I agree that the quality of ICE agents has been severely diminished in earlier years, like under the Obama administration, where I believe immigration was dealt with the best. We had very qualified ICE agents that weren't there just for a $50,000 signing bonus. Now we just see people who are joining. There's very little restrictions on who can join now, and it's got to the point where it's obnoxious, yes. However, I'm not saying do not hate ICE. Do not try and stop their enforcement. If you want a change in the system, the United States has an entire system for this. There's a huge system to introduce reform if you want it. There's a huge system to introduce new policy. You can vote for officials that will lower funding to police, that will increase funding to other sources like mental health. But you shouldn't be hating on police and starting riots, protesting police, and trying removing police presence from your area and throwing rocks at ICE vehicles and blocking ICE vehicles from leaving detention centers, because this just constantly builds up this animosity. If you're an ICE agent and you're doing your job correctly, but suddenly you see all these people, they're gathering up, they're throwing rocks at your car, they're trying to block you, they're yelling threats. Are you going to be more hostile to those people? Yes, you can't help it. That's just natural human schema. You automatically have that built into you. So you can basically what you're blaming on ICE agents, how they're being more hostile, how they're lower. Yeah, that's, in my opinion, somewhat justified because they're dealing with so much hostility on the other end. If you lower yourself to the level of the people you're claiming are being tyrants and are harming you, then you're no better than the tyrant. If you actively start harming other people and just attacking them based off of what organization they belong to, you're no better than the people attacking others just because of a certain race. Now, for the racial profiling issue, where do illegal immigrants come from? Are they coming from Asia? Are they coming from Canada? Are they coming from Europe? Yes, but not in the same numbers that they are coming from the Mexican border, that they are coming from South America, and they're coming from Latin America. And I'm not saying that racial profiling is a valid way of doing law enforcement. We have a system in place that ensures that just because someone's this race doesn't mean you have probable cause to arrest them for committing the crime. We have a whole system behind this that takes care of this. If there's someone who's arresting someone just off of race over and over and over again, then there's going to be an internal investigation into that. They're going to look into it. I yield my time.
All right, that was a really good response. Water, I'll give you 5 minutes to respond to that, and then the floor will be open after that. 5 minutes starts.
Sure. So to go point by point, we would both agree that deportations are necessary, right? It would be irresponsible of a government to not protect and enforce the policies they have in the books for immigration. However, given, as you mentioned, the high amount of people from Latin America and South America and Mexico that are coming to the United States, I think we've gotten to a point where I don't know if we could deport however million amount of people there have been, right? We aren't even sure how many there are. It has jumped from like 1 million to 5 million to 10 million. I've seen numbers as high as 20 million. And like, I think at this point, it's to a point where we cannot reasonably deport all of these people. And additionally, it actually would be beneficial to just integrate them into American society and make them Americans, make them American citizens, make the path to citizenship easier in general. but give some sort of amnesty for people who we could do background checks, people who we can verify their identity, and people who are committed to becoming American citizens. I think that's a fair deal and a fair shake for these people who have come here looking for better lives for themselves and their families. Moving past that, regarding ICE, we both agree that ICE agents are less professional than before, given obviously, the $50,000 signing bonus that was being handed out even during the government shutdown. There was a heavy incentive for ICE agents throughout the Trump administration, which has led to, and also a decrease in the age limit, the age restrictions of those who want to join ICE. However, I don't think any of that justifies or even explains, for example, the fact that ICE agents are masked. They are masked thugs roaming our streets looking for people who look like they're Latinos just because they could be an illegal immigrant. And it's true, they could be an illegal immigrant. There are more Latinos who are illegal immigrants than any other race in this country. But that doesn't mean you can go around saying Latino and then just go grab them and put them in the truck, Additionally, having the masks on also prevents justice. It obstructs justice by not allowing citizens to properly identify who is committing these vile actions. Like, for example, imagine if Derek Chauvin, the guy who choked out George Floyd, imagine if he had a mask on. We just had no idea who the guy was. Right? That would be outrageous if we had no idea who these police officers were. Obviously, there are times and places for masks. Like, for example, during riots, right, when officers are having to wear gas masks and other protective equipment. But when they're out patrolling, I don't think there's a reasonable need for a mask like what ICE agents are donning. Additionally, you said that we probably shouldn't protest against the police or riot against them. We should just go through the policy, go through the legal means of doing so. I would like to mention that protesting is a First Amendment right. It is part of the process of this country. It's how we, the people, express our support. It might have been a misspeak. You might have just meant rioting in general or like other violent activities. But protesting is incredibly important. Obviously, it shouldn't obstruct unless something wrong is happening. But I mean, protesting it's more American than anything else I could think of. To your next point, blaming ICE for hostility when it's natural. I agree that it is natural to be really angry at people who are really angry at you. But at the same time, these people are supposed to be at a higher standard. These are supposed to be the guys who enforce the law, who are professional, even in stressful situations, right? So, like, for example, when I see ICE agents spraying pepper spray at a woman who is shouting in their face, yeah, the woman shouldn't be shouting in his face, but he doesn't give him the right to pepper spray her. And of course, we look at the situation with that gentleman. He was not prosecuted. There was no internal investigation. It was just chalked up to reasonable force. And then violence drags down one side to the level of another. I don't think that's at all relevant. I think that your response should be tit for tat. I've had a long conversation that some of the audience might remember of just explaining how tit for tat, when one side does something that's egregious, you should respond proportionally to what they did. Then obviously we agree on racial profiling. And then you said if it happens, internal investigation. I personally don't trust the government a government agency to investigate itself. That's why we have multiple committees and different courts that check each other. That's what American democracy is founded upon. And I think that civilians do have a part in that. I yield my time.
You had no more time left.
Yeah.
So before we open up the stage here, I just want to bring up the fact that we were talking about this sign-on bonus. I told my father that I was looking for another job, and my conservative father was like, well, didn't you know that Border Patrol's giving $50,000 sign-on bonuses? And I didn't even know what to say to that, because you don't want me as an ICE officer, because I will just not deport anybody. I'll just not get anybody. I just won't. And then secondly, I want to bring up someone in the chat who said, I just lost brain cells listening to those last 2 minutes. I don't know which 2 minutes this chat was earlier.
It was mine.
I gotta tell you, I don't have many to spare. Skipping this might be self-preservation. And then he said, shit, on-screen chat, damn it, I should have stayed silent. Just wanted to throw that out there. But yeah, I like the way we're kind of going with this conversation as far as like scrutiny to police police officers, scrutiny to ICE officers, who I guess kind of fall under that umbrella of law enforcement. But yeah, let's continue on this track where we're talking about like if they deserve scrutiny, what do they deserve scrutiny for? Is it justified, etc. So yes, I will now open the floor to the two of you to discuss openly.
DTV was
So covering what you said in your last thing for the deportation thing, I agree. I already said this. Obama administration's way of handling deportations, where they only went after actually dangerous people and criminals, was the best way of enforcement. It's unrealistic that we're going to deport every single illegal, undocumented immigrant in America. It would request too much money, too much time, too much resources. It's just simply not worth it, which is why I 100% agreed that Obama administration's way of doing this was the best way. However, Trump's administration of deporting everyone, no matter what, and enforcing quotas, that's on part of who's making the rules, not with law enforcement itself. The quotas, the much more, let's get rid of everyone illegal in our country, comes from the President of the United States and the legislative branch, not from ICE and not from the law enforcement agency itself. As for the other with the masks are needed to avoid the harassment of ICE agents. I believe ICE already knew that shit was going to hit the fan very quickly after they started introducing these new, more aggressive policies to deport everyone. So they wanted a way to try and avoid having these ICE agents harassed by people. They're already harassed on the streets. Imagine if they get these people's faces, they find them on social media, they start harassing them on there. It becomes a whole larger issue. Now, I'm not saying that officers should be 100% unidentifiable. You can still ask for their badge number. You can still receive their badge number. You can still and for the George Floyd thing, even if the officer who was wearing a mask, he would have been found out in internal investigation anyway. The police knows which unit is dispatched to what, who is on foot patrol where. They know who is where at all times, and if someone kills someone unlawfully as a law enforcement agent, even if he can't be identified at the scene, an internal investigation will identify him, find him, and ensure proper punishment is given out. For your whole protesting is a part of the First Amendment right, giving your personal opinion is the First Amendment right. What's going on here is my First Amendment right. Under Article 240 of the New York State Penal Law Code, it's actually illegal to gather in groups of more than 5. And if you continue to get even more people into that group, it becomes even more illegal. Additionally, you can be arrested for disorderly conduct if you start causing problems during that protest. For example, throwing garbage everywhere, looting, which has happened in the past, or if it devolves into a riot, which becomes an even bigger problem. And for the woman who is yelling in the ICE agent's face and the ICE agent uses pepper spray, that's a justified use of force because the woman is obstructing justice. She is engaging in disorderly conduct, which is a violation. She could be arrested and put into jail for up to 15 days and face a huge fine. If you are active, you need to know our law, you need to abide by our law, and our law enforcement agents are there to abide by law. For the defund the police movement, the police departments are currently engaging in other ways of law enforcement. We're no longer approaching this with a very legalistic style. There's more other styles that law enforcement agencies are using in order to be more involved with the community and be more part of us. There's community policing, which is basically having law enforcement officers get along with the locals, communicating and becoming friends with them so that we can find ways to handle issues before it gets to the point where it needs to go to our legal system. And while I agree we should put more funding into stuff like mental health, we shouldn't be taking money out of law enforcement agencies because there's more people in America than ever. There's more crime in America than ever. So we need to invest more in law enforcement than ever.
So I think what you're saying comes from a very idealistic version of how we should view the police. But just real quick, I think we should go point by point. So let's start with the deportations. Going after the violent criminals was good under Obama. We agree with that. then the Trump admin policies you would say are worse because they're going after a much broader demographic of people that is incredibly expensive and not very feasible to go after. Would you agree with that?
Yeah,
Okay.
100%.
Okay. What would you expand as like a violent criminal, like someone who commits like a violent felony? Because I know some people who would consider that coming into the like crossing the border illegally would be considered illegal, while like overstaying a visa might not be considered violent, right? Whereas like crossing that border might be. So like, where would you sit on that?
I believe anyone who's committed a felony crime defined in the Penal Law Code.
Okay, sure. Is crossing the border a felony or is it a misdemeanor?
Crossing the border is a violation, which puts it on par with jaywalking. Violation is up to 15 days jail and fine.
From my understanding, it's considered a federal crime because the federal government has jurisdiction over the border, which is why the Texas National Guard wasn't able to put up the barbed wire back in like 2023 or whatever. Like it's federal territory, and federal agents are operating there, and under the jurisdiction of federal courts. From my understanding, it's a felony. I don't think it's like as simple as like a jaywalking thing. Obviously, you could just turn someone away, right? If they're at the border, you probably could just turn them away, and there'd be no problem. But if that person is arrested and prosecuted under the full purview of the law, then that's a felony.
So a federal crime does not mean it's automatically a felony. What a felony is it guarantees a year in jail or a year in a prison or more. And if it's a federal crime, you're spending that time in a federal jail or a federal prison. First time you cross the border, it's identified as a misdemeanor under 8 USC Article 1325, and it becomes a felony if you do it multiple times and do it again under 8 USC Article 1326.
Okay, gotcha. So the first time it's a misdemeanor. Okay, so you would be in favor of, for example, those who were sent back after catch and release and then came back to the United States, right? As long as it's a felony, you would be fine with sending them back to wherever they came from, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, I guess I think we could start there. I would disagree with that. I think it would have to be something violent, like some sort of like a violent crime, where it is like beating, like domestic abuse, assault, battery, something like that, as opposed to just crossing the border. We both agree that borders are important, but I don't think that it is would be a violent action to, make that leap. I don't think it's worth deporting people who try to come to the United States for a better life, even if it's illegal. Like these people want to be American citizens. We agree on that, right?
Yep.
Right. So then I feel like it'd be reasonable to get them on the path to citizenship as opposed to sending them back to Mexico.
We do have paths to citizenship, and I've been a loud speaker of this. I believe that the problem with our immigration issue is, think of it like a sink. We're building a bigger wall around that sink, but it's still going to overflow eventually. We need a bigger drain. We need a better system that will more quickly intake these people and give them American citizenship, which requires a huge investment that many leaders aren't willing to do.
Right, in court systems though, right? Like because the problem is that courts are packed. Like courts do not have enough help getting through all these immigration like requests. Like getting into the United States is a very long time. I would say that we should take funding away from ICE. Instead of bolstering the amount of funding they get, we should put it into the actual judges and the magistrates, the people who are trying to process all of these immigration forms. I think that would be a better use of our money.
And I agree with that. ICE has received too much funding, especially under this recent administration. They're getting way too much money because they're just trying to bag an impossible goal. They're trying to arrest absolutely every single illegal immigrant, which is not a feasible plan.
I completely agree. Though I am a little curious because we agree on most of it, except for that, like, if it's a felony deport, why does a felony make it worse in your eyes?
So a felony is defined as a severe crime that results in 1 year in a prison or more, which can include a life sentence or death sentence depending on the state.
Sure.
Felonies encompass everything from murder to assault, robbery, all of these severe crimes. So while you could argue entering the United States twice shouldn't constitute a felony, that isn't up to law enforcement. You can vote for elected officials that will say that they will reduce it to a misdemeanor if they do it again. However, as it stands right now, it is a felony. And I believe just starting with this system, if they have a felony, they shouldn't be allowed into the US. And if they come in illegally once and then get deported, that should be a sign to them that they need to come here legally, that they need to go through the system. And I understand that it takes a very long time to get here. It takes a very long time and a lot of money to get here into this country. And I've been a huge speaker about how we need a better immigration system. We need to put more money. We need to expand our system into intaking people to the United States, especially with declining birth rates if we want to keep growing as a country. But law enforcement, ICE isn't to blame for that. Like, I think of it as ICE just here to enforce stuff.
Sure.
ICE is just here to listen to the guy upstairs. They're not here to look at the law and think, this is bad. They're not here to do that. They're here to enforce the law, whether they agree with it or not. If I'm in the Secret Service, I may not agree with President Trump, but since I'm in the Secret Service, my job is to protect the President of the United States. So I'll do my job.
Sure. I guess this is a good segue into like just following orders. Like I feel like this is literally just the just following orders thing, where it's like ICE and other law enforcement agencies cooperating with ICE are taking part in actions that we would broadly consider as a society to be immoral. I'm pretty sure the deportations, according to recent polls, are incredibly unpopular amongst Americans. And I mean, like, shit, they probably, like, most of them probably think what they're doing is right. The other probably just do it for the $50,000 sign-up bonus. But, like, either way, these are really horrific actions that they're taking. Like, just, like, again, like, racial profiling is now allowed. According to it was the Supreme Court decision, I believe, that allowed ICE to racially profile Latinos and say, yep, if you look like you're an illegal immigrant, then ICE can detain you and question you and then do whatever. They have the probable cause because you're Latino.
I agree that racially profiling someone to enforce your version of justice is bad. It's actually really bad, and it's not allowed, as you said. You aren't allowed to do it. And if an internal investigation discovers that someone is breaking the rules, they can face punishment. And I know you may not fully trust the government to look into itself. You may not fully trust an agency to look into itself, but an internal investigations unit within an enforcement agency will be completely, if not almost entirely, separated from the main law enforcement branch. They're there to make sure, they're there as oversight. Think of it as a separate organization that oversees ethics. They stand above the main agency and they moderate and make sure that no one is violating and breaking the rules within that agency. And if they violate the guidelines, they face punishment as per our system.
So that would be all fine and dandy if racial profiling actually was illegal. Like as of the 9th of, what month is the 9th? It's been a long day, August. As of September 8th, the Supreme Court overturned an order from a lesser court that said that ICE agents cannot commit egregious racial profiling. They overturned that and they said that ICE should have a reasonable ability to profile someone, and if they happen to be Latino, and that's the probable cause, then that's acceptable. Largely, this was headed by Justice Brett Kavanaugh, and in the dissent, the leader of the dissent, Sonia Sotomayor, I think I mispronounce her name every time. She said we should, quote, "We should not have to live in a country where the government conceives anyone who looks Latino, speaks Spanish, and appears to work a low-wage job," unquote. This was the dissenting opinion, mind you. This is the one that lost. So I mean, like, I don't know. Like, it seems like ICE has carte blanche to just racially profile. It's supported by the Supreme Court. You know, we'd have to do a judicial review on the Supreme. We'd have to appeal that decision and wait for that to go through, which takes months. And from my understanding, this is still policy. I don't. Like, you get what I'm saying?
I understand. However, say I'm a police officer, I can't racially profile someone. Just because someone is black does not give me probable cause or even reasonable suspicion to arrest them. At most, it can
does.
give me mere suspicion, which I can do absolutely nothing with.
Well, no, it does. Under this decision, you can, as long as you have quote unquote probable cause. This applies largely to Latinos at the moment, just because of the largely the agency that's doing this is ICE, so they're
It's
largely
only the
targeting
federal
Latinos. But yeah,
It's only the federal agency, ICE, that has this permission. Other law enforcement do not. So, say
sure,
I'm a Massachusetts state police and I pull over someone on reasonable suspicion just because they're Hispanic. That's illegal. That for me, I can get looked into in an internal investigation. I can lose my badge. It is not allowed. The only agency that can do this is ICE right now. And I agree that's not a good thing. However, the Supreme Court has given them these powers, and as per our system, that's how it is now. And there is a way to appeal it. I personally don't agree with it, but our system ensures that we try to, at least as much as possible, get policy passed that a majority of people agree with. For a state like Texas and a state like New York have completely different rules. Texas has stand your ground, they have Castle House. New York State doesn't. New York State, the people agree with that. So they keep voting in politicians that will promise to make it so you don't have stand your ground in New York. Meanwhile, in Texas, a lot of people in Texas agree with that. A lot of people in Texas like stand your ground, and so they're going to keep voting in politicians that will keep stand your ground and keep Castle House.
really quick. So the reason I was talking about ICE so much is that ICE has been the main agency that is employing this tactic. However, this isn't specifically towards ICE. This is for federal agents. So if the FBI wanted to do the same thing with black people and say and these are the factors they listed, if it was based off of their presumed race, if they were speaking Spanish or English with an accent, obviously that applies more to Latinos, but type of employment and being in an area deemed to have a high concentration of migrants and immigrants, which that same application could be applied to high crime, specifically black on black crime, then technically under this ruling, it seems that the FBI would have reasonable suspicion and would be justified in arresting a black man in Detroit, for example, if they thought that it was a high crime area, if he spoke English with maybe a Kenyan accent, and he had like a low paying job and maybe construction or something like that. These would all be that would be a justified arrest, even though the guy could just be a legal Kenyan who came to the United States and just so happens to say our words a little different. Like I feel like that's a society I don't want to live in. That's why there's so many protests against ICE. That's why there's so much opposition, especially from the Democrats about this.
So this whole, I agree that racial profiling is bad, but if you said racial profiling gives people reasonable suspicion under the new ruling?
Yes, I believe so. I could be wrong. It might not be reasonable suspicion, but they are allowed to detain the person and interrogate them based off of that.
You can stop and question. You can stop and question someone on reasonable suspicion, but you need probable cause to arrest and detain someone.
Right. It's not like a stop and frisk. It's more. It's like actually like taking them to a detainment center, questioning them, asking for like proof of legality there, and then if they can provide it, releasing. Otherwise, it's a very lengthy court process to prove that they are a citizen, or if they aren't a citizen.
The case you're talking about is Noam V. Vasquez Perdomo, right?
I believe so, yeah. It doesn't specify
September
exactly.
8th, 2025, Supreme Court. All right.
So what exactly is this court case?
Basically, this is the Supreme Court overruling a decision by lesser courts, saying the lesser courts were saying that it's a violation of the Fourth Amendment right to unreasonable search and seizure. They were basically saying that the Fourth Amendment would apply against racial profiling. The racial profiling should not be allowed under the Fourth Amendment. However, the Supreme Court overturned this ruling, which basically means that the lesser court's ruling is null and void. That means that they basically are disregarding the Fourth Amendment in this matter. The court said that it was constitutional to racially profile people based on the criteria they listed, which were the factors I listed earlier: accent, the area that they're in, and presumed race, and among others. Yeah, I can put it in the side chat if you want to put it on.
Okay, so looking at this, it does not give. So Vasquez Perdomo v. Nome, it does not give probable cause. So you cannot arrest someone based off of racial profiling, ethnicity, accent, location, and type of work. It is allowed for forming a basis of reasonable suspicion, which is very fancy talk. You can use it as a part of reason for reasonable suspicion, which does allow you to stop and question someone. However, it does not allow you to detain them for extensive periods of time, to arrest them, to seize assets. It doesn't allow for that.
Well, so reasonable suspicion, right? And I'm looking at it. This is from Kavanaugh. He's saying that to stop an individual for brief questioning about immigration status, the government must have reasonable suspicion that the individual is legally present in the United States. We would agree on that. Reasonable suspicion is a lesser requirement, and it explains what reasonable suspicion is. It's a lesser requirement and is considerably short of the preponderance of the evidence standard. However, the question of whether an officer has reasonable suspicion depends on the totality of the circumstances, and then it cites the circumstances, like quoting, here, those circumstances include that there is an extremely high percentage of illegal immigrants in the Los Angeles area. He's using Los Angeles as an example in this. That those individuals tend to gather in certain locations to seek daily work, that those individuals often work in certain kinds of jobs, such as day labor, landscaping, agriculture, and construction, that do not require paperwork and are therefore especially attractive to illegal immigrants, and that many of those illegally in the Los Angeles area come from Mexico or Central America and do not speak much English. Those factors give them reasonable probable cause is what he's saying.
So reasonable suspicion is a set of facts or circumstances that would lead me to believe someone may have committed a crime, but I don't have a specific crime. Probable cause is when I have a set of facts or circumstances that someone has committed a specific crime. Under reasonable suspicion, I can stop and question them. With probable cause, I can arrest, search, and seize without a warrant. What you named were facts and circumstances that would lead a reasonably intelligent or prudent person to believe that someone may be committing a crime as defined by our law, which is being in this country illegally. Now, while I disagree with using a racial element for this, it should have never been given out by the Supreme Court, in my opinion. The Supreme Court has given them the permission to do this. Our system has allowed ICE to have these powers, and there is a system to take these powers away from ICE if the people believe they're abusing it, which many people do. And I do believe that there is an appeal to Nome v. Vasquez already.
Right, there is an appeal. It's probably gonna take months still at this point. But to respond directly, right, what you're talking about is true. Reasonable suspicion does cover that, and reasonable suspicion is granted, obviously, in this ruling. But it also says, when reading Kavanaugh's concurring opinion, quote, under this court's precedents, not to mention common sense, those circumstances taken together can constitute at least reasonable suspicion of illegal presence, unquoting. That he's saying that it at least gives reasonable suspicion. Then he continues, and he says, importantly, reasonable suspicion means only that immigration officers may briefly stop the individual and inquire about immigration status. If the person is a U.S. citizen or otherwise lawfully in the United States, that individual will be free to go after the brief encounter. Only if the person is illegally in the United States may the stop lead to further immigration proceedings. Now, the problem that I have with this opinion is that it requires that the person has their legal document saying that they are a citizen of the United States on them when they are confronted by the police officer. So if an ICE agent walks up to you and you're a natural born citizen, but you don't have proof of citizenship or proof that you're in this country legally, they could detain you and take you to a facility until they can verify your record. So in practice, right, it's very different from what Kavanaugh is describing. Kavanaugh is describing a very simple process where it's stop and frisk. Basically, like, hey, are you in the United States legally? Yep, I'm in the United States legally. Verify that. Okay, you're in the United States legally. You're free to go. But most immigrants don't carry their immigration papers around with them because they honestly shouldn't have to have a reasonable fear that they will be stopped and frisked by an officer and asked if they're even a citizen of this country, right? Many do now because of the Trump administration, but especially before Obama, they did not have to carry their immigration papers around. But bottom line is that a lot of the times they're getting detained because they don't have their immigration papers on them or proof of citizenship.
So while I disagree with that, again, that is not the fault of the ICE agents. That's the fault of the people who made the guidelines and rules for ICE. They made it so that ICE has to detain someone if they don't have their papers on them at that moment, which I disagree with. But it's their job to do that, so they have to do that.
They don't
If
have to
I
do it
refuse
though.
to-
You don't have to. You don't have to comply. Obviously, you'll probably get in trouble. But like, this seems incredibly immoral. Like, this does not, like, first of all, it goes against the spirit of the Constitution. I think we could both agree that the Fourth Amendment should cover this. The Fourth Amendment provides us the right against unreasonable search and seizure. I feel like this is an unreasonable search and seizure, right? I don't think it's reasonable that an immigrant has to carry around their immigration papers everywhere they go, or if an American citizen has to carry around their goddamn birth certificate, for example. I feel like that's incredibly unreasonable. I think we can both agree that that would be a violation of the Fourth Amendment, which is what the lesser court was appealing to when they made their initial decision.
So the Supreme Court did originally rule that it was a Fourth Amendment violation if you were to profile someone based off of race alone. However, they did lift that ban. So according to the Supreme Court, it's allowed. According to lower courts, it isn't. But the Supreme Court overrules the lower court because we have a system in place. And there is an appeal to get rid of Noam v. Vasquez, which I hope does go in favor of removing the racial profiling component out of reasonable suspicion and probable cause. However, it is still not the fault of the ICE agent. If you don't do your job, you get fired. That's just how it works. What they're doing is they're following their rules. They're making sure others follow our rules. And if they don't, they receive the proper punishment as detailed in our penal law book, as wanted by a majority, or on paper at least, wanted by a majority of the people in the United States. Would you agree?
Yes, just one moment. I do apologize. It won't be very long. I have to get a charger for my phone.
You good?
So I kind of like where we're going. We're really focusing on ICE and like immigration and how that all works together. But I guess if I had trying to get the conversation going, you're saying pretty much we shouldn't scrutinize the police for this. We should scrutinize the people who make the law. But
Yep.
It's the people from my perspective and what I believe Water agrees with. It is those people who are violating the rights. It's not particularly Kavanaugh or anybody who is making the laws. So I guess as far as scrutiny goes with that, how do you kind of tie all that together?
According to the Supreme Court, it isn't a violation of the rights, which I personally disagree with. I do believe that you shouldn't racially profile someone to gain probable cause or reasonable suspicion. However, the Supreme Court has ruled that it is allowed and it isn't a violation of rights. So technically, these ICE agents aren't violating people's rights. And while I disagree with it personally, I'm not going to attack the ICE agents for this system being implemented, for the system not giving them this power. I'm going to be mad at the Supreme Court justices and the people who even brought this case forward to try and appeal this, or the people who brought the case forward to appeal that the Fourth Amendment right does protect people from being racially profiled. What I'm trying to say is, like, I'm mad at the Supreme Court justices and I'm mad at the people who are appealing this and making it so that ICE agents do have this power. I'm not mad at the ICE agents who are what some people think are abusing this power, if that makes sense.
Sure. I understand what you're saying. It's just really I feel like we're taking the responsibility away from law enforcement, or specifically ICE in this situation, that even though there are policies being made by the Trump administration that they are obligated to follow, they also have an obligation to the Constitution. When you swear an oath especially in the military, for example, when you swear an oath to the Constitution and the people of the United States, not to the Trump administration or the Biden administration or Obama or whoever. And again, this seems like a clear violation of the Fourth Amendment. Obviously, Kavanaugh disagrees, but I would agree with the dissenting opinion by Normayer, I think, by that says that it isn't a violation of the Fourth Amendment, because these people do have that Fourth Amendment protection. They do.
No, I agree with that, but it's not the Trump administration who gave these people the power it's not the Trump administration who gave the authority to racially profile for probable cause or reasonable suspicion. It's the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court has ruled that they decide what is constitutional and allowed under the Constitution and what isn't. And they've agreed that racially profiling someone for reasonable suspicion or probable cause is okay. That's just the Supreme Court. So technically, they're not violating these rights because the Supreme Court has decided that these rights don't exist. I disagree. I don't personally agree with it, but that's what the Supreme Court has ruled, and how our system is intended to work should be a majority of people in America who agree with.
Sure, a majority of people in America disagree with this Supreme Court ruling. Additionally, a majority of representatives disagree with it, from my understanding. However, the legislative doesn't have an ability to exactly counsel the Supreme Court in regards to this situation. However, again, like we're both recognizing that there is a responsibility on the people who make the policy. And what I meant by the Trump administration earlier was that they are making the policy and then the Supreme Court is supporting that policy. However, what I'm saying is that by supporting that policy, and then by enforcing that policy from ICE, you create the situation that makes this so abhorrent. You have the people who enforce it, right? You have the people who say, yep, this decision is okay. Obviously, you have the people who make the decision in the first place. Then you have the people who take and they use their resources to fulfill the vision that is implanted by that policy. And you, like, without any of these pieces, though, there would be no deportations like what we're seeing. Without the Supreme Court supporting it, it would be deemed unconstitutional and illegal, and therefore they would have the ability to lawfully disobey those orders. When you look at the policy, obviously, if the policy never was suggested, there would be no need for the rest of it. And if you had no ICE agents enforcing this policy, we would have nobody having to drag children out of their homes at like 12 o'clock at night while they're basically half naked, right? Like, without any of these factors, this would not be a problem we'd have to talk about today. What I'm saying is that it could have been, we had the policy come through. So we already have this section has failed the American people. They are agreeing with what I would see as an authoritarian view. Then you have the Supreme Court reinforcing that authoritarian policy. If the Supreme Court had said no, we wouldn't be here. However, both of those have failed us. So now we're looking to ICE agents, and we're looking to ICE agents to say, hey, you don't have to deport 4-year-old fucking Maria here just because she speaks fucking Spanish and she's a little darker skinned and she might come from Mexico, right? We're saying that you have a choice. You have a choice to do what we believe is the moral thing, because everyone else has failed us. And it takes time to go through those, right? Trump administration is going to be in office until 2028. Supreme Court is lifelong. Their positions are lifelong. But the ICE agents, they have the ability to do something right now. That's why I'm putting more responsibility on them, because it's the immediate difference that they can make right now.
Okay, so say your dream situation comes true. Half of all the ICE agents who disagree with this instantly say, no, I'm not going to do this. Guess what? They're all out the door. They're fired. And guess who's hired? The same exact idiots we are all complaining about. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it. ICE has really lowered their requirements for hiring people. And they'll lower those requirements even more to get more people to do what they decide is necessary.
Well, hold a minute. Sorry. Who are the same idiots we're complaining about? Who would be replacing all these ICE officers?
I'd be talking about ICE officers who probably, like a most recent incident where an ICE officer shot a priest with a rubber bullet. Someone who is unprofessional, is very clearly lacking of experience and is very clearly there only for financial incentive or only because they agree with the Trump administration. People are not qualified to be law enforcement officers in any manner, in my opinion.
But they're already out there. Like that guy is
Exactly.
out there. He's out there. So like what I'm saying is that if these people weren't out there, what I'm saying is let's say just nobody joins ICE. Let's say everyone leaves and nobody joins ICE. No new recruits. Nobody who's currently in the line of duty is doing anything regarding these situations. We would not have this problem. Like again, nobody would be kicking them out. You'd have to get the 40 or like the 80-year-old Judge Kavanaugh to get out of his wheelchair and come freaking take him out. Well, I mean, he's not in a wheelchair, but still, you get what I mean. He's old as shit.
And that's a beautiful scenario if it was even possible. But look at what's in America. There's people who agree with Trump. There's people who agree with current deportation methods. And there's people who are willing to join in on these current deportation methods. So while your scenario would on paper work, it would require such a weird string of coincidences where it's just not possible.
Well, sure, that's the ideal.
And I'm not saying let's not hold ICE officers accountable for their crimes. If they violate our current guidelines, if they make it so, if they do something that's not allowed under the rules, if they unlawfully kill someone, if they use unwarranted force, they should face punishment. The ICE officer who fired a rubber bullet at a priest should face an internal investigation and probably should be removed from Immigration and Customs Enforcement because they broke the rules according to their guidelines. We should hold people accountable still, and I'm not at all disagreeing with that. However, it's not, and for someone who said we are just doing our jobs as a historically great excuse, it's not that. The ICE has not been told to eliminate anyone. ICE hasn't been told to go into people's doors and drag them to concentration camps. ICE has not been told to perpetrate a genocide.
I mean,
if ICE was told to do that, I'm sure more people would most definitely notice something is wrong and not do it.
What do we call Alligator Alcatraz, a place where we've sent hundreds of illegal immigrants, and people have disappeared from there, by the way.
I'm aware of the Alligator Alcatraz.
That's a concentration camp. We recognize that. That's a place where we put a bunch of people without due process. We're keeping them there. We're concentrating them there, and people are disappearing.
I agree that Alligator Alcatraz violated the guidelines, and so did our system because Alligator Alcatraz is being shut down by our system, which I trust in.
Sure, but the fact that it even existed in the first place is abhorrent. It is against the ideals of this country for such a thing to even have existed.
And personally, I agree. However, our system's there and in place in order to make sure everything follows the Constitution in this country, follows the laws of this country, and make sure that nothing like what happens in Germany in World War II and what happens with all these genocides going on around the world, it makes sure that that can't happen in America. Our system is purposely made. Remember when you were stating how all of those things had to happen, the Supreme Court had to agree with it. Congress had to agree with it. The president had to agree with it. That's a long system. Do you really think if Trump put in the order, let's eliminate an entire race, that would go through that system? No.
Depends on the race.
It would probably be shot down in the first phase.
I think so. I think, honestly, if we got to a point where Trump's sycophantic fucking traitors were able to do what they wanted in this country, I think we probably would just have them out of here. Get rid of all the Latinos, because they're all immigrants of some kind or another. But I mean, that's an entirely different can of worms, right? Like that's more like that's going to be more like a Trump-centered conversation. But either way, like I guess we could say that like it might not get to genocide yet, but like we're pretty far down the line. You know what I mean? Like.
And something else to note is law enforcement agents here in America aren't just held to the standards and guidelines that are here in America. They're held to international guidelines. They're held to, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't commit genocides, you shouldn't murder civilians. They're held to these rules as well as the guidelines we have here and made in America. So even because after World War II, we find out this huge, horrible genocide happened happened, and this excuse of we were just doing our jobs, that doesn't work. So we set international guidelines that everyone has to abide by or they face punishment, and we have domestic guidelines here. So even if Trump says and rewrites the guidelines here in a very unlikely scenario that law enforcement should commit genocide against A, B, and C groups, the international guidelines will hold these people responsible if they commit those actions.
So when we were deporting people to El Salvador is notorious. Their prison system is notoriously terrible. Like, it is literally comparable to early labor camps from Nazi Germany, and they're comparable to current labor camps in China. We were deporting people who weren't even from El Salvador there. We were making deals with the president of El Salvador. Is it Maduro or something like that? No, I think it's Venezuela. It might be. I don't know. But either way, we were making deals with the president of El Salvador, saying that we'll give you all these illegals as long as you take them. We don't care. And in exchange, they were using them for essentially slave labor. That seems like a violation of international law. That seems like a violation of our own like domestic policy, and not even to mention the double tapped boat that we said was a drug boat. It wasn't even going to the United States. It probably wasn't. The drugs weren't probably even going to go to the United States. From all accounts, it looked like it actually was going to go to Europe, which would be a European problem. And we don't even know if it was a drug boat. We assume it was a drug boat. We have no idea.
So I agree with that. However, that is a military issue. That's an issue with the military's hierarchy. That's an issue with this current administration. When ICE agents arrested people and detained people they believed to be illegal immigrants, did they know they were going to go to El Salvador? Realistically, not. They were just doing their job. They were detaining someone and they were holding them here under suspicion that we believe this person may be an illegal immigrant. It is not the average ICE agent's fault that the Trump administration violated international guidelines and domestic guidelines, making what is an illegal deal with a foreign country. ICE doesn't have another thing. ICE doesn't have jurisdiction in El Salvador. Our police departments don't have jurisdiction in El Salvador. The FBI doesn't. The CIA doesn't. So
Right,
even if Trump broke domestic policy, since it happened in El Salvador as per our system, we can't really investigate it. It's up to the international guidelines and international law enforcement to look into this and to have an investigation and hold people who should be accountable.
So first, 2 points there. The first one was about you can't blame ICE agents for the policies of Trump. Yes, you can. I think so. I think if you're enabling the dictatorial policies that Trump is passing, then that makes you responsible in some degree, right? Like if you're enabling the guy to be a dictator and he acts like a dictator, you can't be surprised. You know, it just doesn't really. There's no excuse, at least morally.
All right. So
Yeah.
I have some people who are really, really wanting to come up. So maybe just to drive this conversation along, we'll go ahead and bring up some people. We'll start with Mythic. Hello, Mythic.
Hello, Mace. Hello, Water. I do. I want to harken on something here because most of this is me just trying to understand the logic being applied here, Water. So you are applying the actions of the U.S. security state and specifically ICE are applicant to the onset stages of genocide?
Kind of. I can elaborate more on that. It's more so that we've gotten down the line to a point where we're getting closer and closer every day to genocide. We're still a long ways off, but we're getting progressively closer and closer every day. That's my problem, right? I don't think we're like on the cusp, like tomorrow it's gonna be a genocide of Latinos. I think it's gonna be more so over the next coming years, we might see more intolerance and indifference even towards Latinos in the United States, even if they're born here, to the point where it's almost apathy.
Okay, yeah, and the second one, this is the one that's the most confusing, at least to me. So, I'm very lost as to what you even necessarily want done here, because ICE is not a legislative authority. even though you know that my opinion of ICE and American law enforcement and their conduct and discipline is very, very little. It's a joke. It's pathetic. They should be ashamed. It's, however, still not up to any of these agencies to dictate any of the things going on. Now, I don't take quite as far of a view as the other guy in this debate, that they should be fully absolved from the thought of it being partially responsible, but I don't understand how you are getting the basis for saying ICE, a agency that is legislatively completely unempowered. It doesn't even have the powers to say the ATF or FBI does, which allows it to actually influence the laws and rules being applied. It has zero legal authority to dictate the standards being provided to it, which is actually rare for federal branches like itself. It is a underpowered federal agency from a legal perspective. And despite this, on top of it, you also are claiming constitutional faults with their conduct, despite the fact that the interpreters and deciders of the Constitution take the ICE stance. I mean, if you want to disagree with it, that's 100% optional, but you cannot say that it goes against the Constitution when in the United States of America, the Constitution itself is not the sole rule of law. In fact, in practice and de facto for over a century now, given how much the Supreme Court rules on even just societal issues, it's the Supreme Court that decides the law. And unless you want to go down the rabbit hole of saying that the Supreme Court should not be allowed to interpret the Constitution, or that it should only be literally interpreted, and ask my continent how that goes, I just don't see how you've got any of the legal basis you seem to be claiming here. It doesn't exist. There is none. There is nothing constitutionally against what is happening, for it has been decided as such.
So, first point about you're confused exactly about what I want to happen, especially regarding ICE. What I would want is to stop racial profiling and get rid of the masks. That's about it. Like, that's all I expect from those officers, is just stop the profiling, stop the masks. But I also I hold them to a moral responsibility, because they are the ones doing the actions that lead to the immoral action later on. So, like, when they arrest someone because they're Latino, they don't have proof of their papers, and that person ends up going to Alcatraz or to El Salvador, I would say that it is on the police officer or the federal officer there to take into his judgment that, and with the information that he has, take this into account when he is deciding whether to detain this individual. Of course, it would be much better, ideally, that we don't have Alcatraz or El Salvador at all, but that would require policy, that would require legislature, which takes a very long time to pass, relative to, how long it takes to deport someone from Alcatraz to El Salvador. So until that changes, and that I would say that they need to stop profiling, stop the masks. Ideally, just stop fucking working in general, but that's not as plausible or even feasible for these people. Obviously, money makes the world go round, and you can't put bread on the table if bread costs money, But to your second point, and I'll keep it brief, even though my interpretation of the Constitution is different than the Supreme Court's, we both have a different interpretation. Those still exist, but obviously the court's interpretation trumps mine, right? It has a higher standing legally than mine, right? Mine has almost none, while theirs is the highest in the land, right? It's similar to how a Catholic may disagree with the Pope, but they both have different interpretations of the same thing.
Okay.
So you disagree with racial profiling, and that's great because we have a system. You can make an application in this country to get rid of racial profiling from our country's law enforcement. You can 100% make that application.
Right, and it takes a long time to do that, though, is what I'm saying. Like, for
But
example,
it's still there. It's not like you're completely powerless and you just have to sit on your thumbs and take it the whole time. There is a system where you can make it so you can do change. That's what makes this country so great. You can change the rules if you believe, and if a majority of people believe that the rules should be changed.
Sure, I know what you're saying. That's probably the best process to do it. But the problem is that to get a bill passed in Congress is like pulling teeth, especially of how divided it is under the Trump administration. At least in our Biden, we got something passed. I don't think I can name a single bill that's been passed in Congress, except for like the anti-Semitism bill, which was ridiculous, but whatever. There has not been much done relative. Like most of it's been through executive orders for a reason, because Congress isn't passing much in terms of real legislation. But like what I'm trying to say there is that it could take months to get a bill through Congress, but it takes about, I think it's a 5-hour flight to go from Alcatraz in Florida to El Salvador. So
that's the final thing I'd like to touch on before getting out of your hair. You have made some pretty gross. I don't know. I just feel like the claims you've made and the tone you used applies a really unstatistically true scale of the damage ICE is causing here. As of now, there is 20 people in the entirety of this year, probably going to end at 20, but maybe some unlucky bastard will make it 21 before the New Year's, that have died this entire year in ICE custody, or from clashes with ICE, if memory serves. That, given the amount of detainees and otherwise, is not terrible. I mean, obviously 20 people dying is 20 people dying, but let's be real here, especially given a lot of your shit, and this is just what you do, and I know this is what you do, which is why I'm not irritated about it, because a lot of your claim to authority when it comes to morality is a lot of Nuremberg and Hague shit. None of this compares to the fucking Gestapo or NKVD.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, I would agree. I'm not saying that 20 did.
False.
Yeah. Well, what I'm saying is that the number is low. I completely agree. Then 20 people dead. That's a pretty good operation, right? Not much has gone wrong. Okay. People forget we live in a country of 330 million people. It's rising by now. It might be 340 by now. 350 by now. Okay, perfect. It's even more than I expected. 20 dead, 350 million people. Of course, not everyone's incarcerated, but still, it's a good stat. It's a good stat.
And this is literally gonna be the last thing I say. I'm gonna leave right after. I do think another thing. This is just kind of more food for thought, especially for you, because we've kind of talked about this outside of this debate. A lot of what you say applies that officers and federal agents should, instead of having loyalty to the institutions of the United States of America, should almost be loyal only to specific figures or political ideology, as opposed to the nation or constitution itself. And I just think that's not necessarily, given my family's little empire, well, I say little, given the fate of empires that end up like that, such as the Habsburg monarchy, I just think that's a very dangerous thought to fall into, of saying, if you disagree with the institutions of your country, even if you work for it and have employed yourself within it and have sworn an oath to it, you should immediately abandon it or even potentially work to sabotage it and its efforts of doing its current policy. It's a republic. You're not always going to agree with who's in charge. And I think the idea that if anyone you disagree with to this degree is in charge, you should immediately abandon the institutions of the country is a very unhealthy and corrosive thought that will eventually lead to either the bad guys you don't like dominating those institutions because you just left, or the worst outcome, and the likely one, is the complete collapse of the institutions themselves as they turn into cesspits of bureaucratic infighting that don't achieve anything. And just think on the logic. It's a little dangerous. That's all. Sure. Thank you for having me, Mace.
Anytime, Mythic. Yeah, I guess if you two want to discuss on that for a second before I bring somebody else up.
Yeah, something else I want to bring up, Waters, for your mistreatment of people detained by ICE. As that guy said, how many people died?
20. Yeah. However, I do want to bring up that 1,200 are missing. That's honestly worse to me than 20. I would rather have 1,200 dead than 1,200 missing. Obviously not in the practical sense. If I'm the family, I'd rather be missing than confirmed dead. But the fact that we don't know what happened to them is honestly egregious. I don't even... but again, this is only reported by news sources that can be questionable, admittedly. But still, let's say that they're wrong on 75% of it. Out of 3 every 4 claims they make, they're wrong. That would be 300 people missing. Now, this is different from when we lose equipment. I'll keep it very brief, I promise. It's different from when we lose equipment, because at least equipment can be replaced. People cannot be replaced. Not in the way that we are assigning them value.
And I 100% agree with that. And even if all 1,200 of those people who are missing end up dead, which is a horrible thing, but still incredibly unlikely, it would still be comparably a pretty low number compared to how many people die in federal prisons and state prisons and county jails every single year. If you can look this up too, the DOJ's Bureau of Justice Statistics in 2023 posted a report talking about how in 2021, how many people died, statistics related to deaths in custody, and arrested related deaths. And you can look at all of these numbers here. And unlike the Epstein files, nothing is redacted. So you can look at everything here and you can see all this information, considering how many people ICE has detained and how many resources have been allocated to keeping them detained, which isn't very much. It is still, it's not good. It's never good to have people dead or missing. However, comparatively to our prison system, those numbers aren't terrible. And I'm not saying that people dying should just be brushed off. Oh, well, this is worse. Both are equally bad. Both is bad. However, you can't just point at how, oh, look, ICE is doing all this, but then not bring up how we have our prison systems who are making much more people disappear or die. We have tons of other issues with how ICE runs their detainment centers with mistreatment. It's not just people going missing and people dying in these centers. And I agree with you there. There needs to be more oversight. And there is being oversight. As you said, you had a lot of complaints with Alligator Alcatraz. Alligator Alcatraz got shut down. It's no longer going to continue in business. And it leaves a lasting impression that we, the people, can learn from. And we can build our system, which is why America, in my opinion, is so great. We can build our system and build onto it to make sure that does not repeat itself again.
Sure. I mean, we can obviously learn from the mistakes, but like the question is how much damage has been done for us to learn that mistake. Like the German people now have learned that, genocide sucks, but it took millions of lives to get to that point where they were denazified, right? And I do hate to always harken it back to Nazi Germany, but they're a very good example of this, where the damage that was caused from to learn that lesson was immense. Like the world was changed forever. Okay, but still, regardless, yeah, I hope you get my point though with that.
Comparing ICE and ICE detainment centers to World War II Germany and concentration camps is like saying a single apple is equivalent to an entire orchard. It blows it way out of proportion.
No. What I would say is that the comparison is that orchards always start with one tree, and then you add more trees to make it an orchard. Right now, we have one tree, which is the Alcatraz was the first tree, and that got shut down, thankfully. Right? I think we'd all agree on that. But don't forget, we have had a history of concentration camps in this country. What do you think the original reservations were for the Indians? What do you think that the concentration camps that during the Second World War were for Japanese Americans? And that's the even better case because a lot of those Japanese Americans were natural born citizens, but they were still treated with distrust, with disrespect, and they still fought for this fucking country. There was a regiment of Japanese American soldiers who served in Europe because obviously they can't fight against their own countrymen. They'd be race traitors was what the idea was. They were sent to Europe and they fought Nazis for a government that literally had their families in camps. Like, I'm not making a legal judgment on this, not even a moral judgment. I'm just stating that there is precedent for this in the past. Obviously, we look on those with harsh scrutiny now, but it has happened before, and it was accepted by the public widely at the time. It has happened. It can happen again. I think we forget that sometimes, that America isn't an exceptional country in terms of how we think. If something can happen once, it can happen again.
So that's what's great about our system. And as I said before, we can constantly add on to it. During the reservations, and these reservations basically being concentration camps, modern day, are they that anymore? No, because our system made it so we can add on to this. We can fix this. We can fix these issues and problems. And and make it better. We can't erase that dirty mark on our history, and I don't want to erase it because it serves as a lesson. It serves as a reminder of what happened prior. Comparing what happened with Japanese internment and the Native Americans being pushed onto these terrible reservations, and then comparing that to ICE still isn't a good comparison because there is a huge difference between the goals and the promises that were made that resulted in that kind of stuff. When the Native Americans were pushed onto these reservations, it was because of manifest destiny. America wanted to expand. When Japanese were put into concentration camps on American soil, it was because we were paranoid. We believed that they'd all be spies.
Sure, just like how we're paranoid now that all Latinos in America could be illegal immigrants and that they could be rapists from not MI6, what is it, MS-13, right? Like,
And I agree, and that's it. But the thing is, we're not going to have concentration camps that the Japanese had to go through for the Latinos in
Are we?
America. We're not, because
How do
our
you know that?
system makes it so that reminder serves us well, and we do not repeat that mistake. And I trust in our system that this does not happen. You said the first attempt, Alligator Alcatraz, it got shut down.
Well, no, not
Our
the first
system is
attempt.
working.
No, the first attempt was before. It's been attempted many times and worked out many times. What I'm saying is that this was allowed to happen, and many people supported it at first. There were I don't know if you saw it, but there were so many jokes among conservatives, not just online, but in person, face to face, where they would make jokes about Alligator Alcatraz and how it was the most based thing ever, how amazing it was that we were rounding up the Latinos and putting them in these fucking camps and we're kicking them out, right? To address your point though, I think I think you're misusing the word comparison. I think what you mean to say is equivocal. So like, for example, when you're talking about how I'm comparing ICE to, for example, the Gestapo would be the equivalent German example. It would be a bad equivocation, but it would be a good comparison. That's what I'm saying. It's good to compare it because when you look at the stages from nothing, from just street thugs to an actual secret like police, you can see the steps and you can see it demonstrated in ICE. Obviously, we're not at that last rung yet where it's like, open the door, I need the Jews. But like, we're definitely, we're at one of those steps, whether we like it or not, whether it's from 0 to 100. Right. And I think it's very good to compare those because through that comparison, we can learn not only how these ideas get popular, but also if we're heading in that direction. I think we are heading in that direction, which is why I'm so against it.
And that's what makes America so great. You can have, but the facts here is our system ensures that does not happen. And I trust our system. I trust the multiple layers that makes positive change, yes, slow, but also stops negative change. Think of it as a huge filter. It takes very long for the air to go through. However, it's clean air that exits.
Is it though? Because like, for example, me and you both disagree on the decision by Kavanaugh that we discussed earlier. The case here, let me pull it up again. Name of it being, let's see, what was it? It was, Pedro Vasquez Perdomo versus Department of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem is the secretary of it. Like we disagree on that because and for I would say pretty good reason. A lot of people disagree with it. Lawyers from all around disagree with it. Obviously, the lesser court disagreed with it, but still, we had this decision passed through the Supreme Court, and this is supposed to be the last. This is supposed to be the last filter in our system, right? If we have if this is like an air filtration system, this is supposed to be the one. This is the one that blocks out everything that got through those other barriers, and they went through. Again, it was about racial profiling. It doesn't necessarily relate to the camps, but still, like we could agree that things do get past our filter. No filter is perfect, right? I mean, that's what they said in Germany before Hitler became chancellor, and it was like, oh shit, we're screwed.
And I'll concede, I'll admit, 100%, nothing's perfect. That the founding fathers knew when they wrote the Constitution, it isn't going to be perfect. It isn't going to work. So they made it so it could change. We could add these changes when necessary. We can keep building on to our filter. So when this happened with our Supreme Court, there will be in the future, we'll look back on this situation, depending on how much the dominoes fall, depending on how bad the damage is, we'll look back on this and we'll add on to the system. We'll add to this system to make sure, we'll add to this filter to make sure that doesn't repeat itself.
And I understand, right? I'm a huge advocate for the system that we have in the United States, but it would be very naive to assume that it's a perfect system by any means, right? We can for example, with the internal investigation things that you brought up before, right? There is no internal investigation for the Supreme Court. You can appeal the decision, but that goes straight back to the Supreme Court. If the Supreme Court agrees with their decision again, you're fucked. There's nothing you really can do about it. You can just keep appealing and appeal. Oh, actually, there might be a limit on the appeals you can have. But you can, if it's allowed, you can appeal forever and ever. But if it's the same Supreme Court, it's just going to keep agreeing with itself unless eventually you get a new Supreme Court pick, or for some reason one of them is removed from office, whether through death because they're old as shit or through some other means. Right? It's a great system, but it's not perfect, which is why it's a duty of their citizenry to keep that system in check.
And I've never said it's perfect, but I've said I trusted in that system. I believe in the system fully. We can add on to it. If all the ICE agents did what you said, if they all just dropped out, they stopped participating, then what? Because someone else who does agree with that ideology will come in. So if you go against your government, if you go against your government,
you go ahead and
say something.
You finish making your point. Okay. So I assume we all agree that keeping these organizations in check is important. Would scrutiny to those organizations not be a valuable way to do that? And I throw that question out to both of you.
Yes, absolutely. I think the level of scrutiny, especially with ICE, is it's close to that sweet spot where the media is investigating, is allowed to critique it in a manner that they deem fit, as long as it's not defamation, obviously. And I think that the amount of blowback they're getting for this, something that most Americans would consider immoral, is about on par with how I expect the system to operate. If they do an immoral action that most people disagree with, I expect a massive reaction from the people who think it's immoral, and they have a right to protest and advocate against those policies and those actions.
I'd argue the criticism is hitting the wrong thing, because what ICE agents are doing now would not be possible without horribly incompetent leadership, terrible legislation, and a near impossible goal that they are trying to meet desperately, and they know they can't with these quota systems and all of this. Was this passed by ICE officers and ICE agents? No, it was passed by our government, by our lawmakers, by the people all the way up at the top, all in charge of ICE, who have authority to tell the chief, hey, you have to do this.
Sure, but the chief himself has to either accept the consequences of not following that action or go with the action, which is like, in some sense, it has to be a better option to go against what they're saying, if not for the morality of it, for some sort of like, if not for the morality, then at least of some sort of like appeal to law and the Constitution, like specifically when it comes to the racial profiling, for example.
But the thing is, the people who have the last say in the Constitution agreed with ICE on this, agreed that racial discrimination can be used, and that's just our system. Additionally, look at the problems we already have. Look at the problems I listed. Incompetent leadership. If the competent leadership who disagrees with this leaves, it just worsens the problem. It makes it so Kristi Noem says, oh, this guy's out. Let me put someone who agrees with me, doesn't have any intelligence of their own, and will just nod their head and say yes every time I tell them to do something stupid.
Well, you're
we've
saying
worsened that situation. We have a more incompetent leadership.
what you're saying is that they're leaving. They are leaving, but it's not like how you're phrasing it, where they're leaving voluntarily. They're being fired. Like, Trump is notorious for firing people who disagree with him. Like, for example, he went after his own it's the guy who heads like the Treasury. I don't remember what his name was, but he appointed the guy, and then he started shitting on him during a second term, because he was appointed in the first term, and he started getting shit on in the second term by Trump. And he said that, I don't know who appointed this guy. That was Trump, right? The incompetency comes from Trump. And he fires people because he wants to blame everyone else for the problems that he creates. So, I mean, like, if you want me to talk about how much I dislike Trump, trust me, I have plenty to say about that. But, like, for the sake of it, right, I think the incompetence is it's malicious. I don't think it's incompetence per se. I think it's malicious.
It's just it is malicious. However, it is a staggering degree of incompetence with the Epstein files and how poorly they were released. We can see someone didn't know that highlighting something in black doesn't actually redact the information.
Well, sure, that's part of it.
Horrible incompetence. Pete Hegseth very clearly does not know how anything in our military works because he's never held a more legitimate role in the military other than possibly being a janitor in the National Guard.
Well,
That's incompetence. Christy Nome.
Well, hold on.
Christy Nome's most experience is in shooting dogs.
Well,
That's
sure.
also incompetence. These people aren't fit to rule, and they've been appointed by someone arguably incompetent for president, but majority of people agreed with, so he is in charge now. So that's just how our system would work.
Well, sure. What I'm advocating for is civil disobedience. What you're arguing for, from my understanding, is that we should obey the law even if it might not be popular or moral. I think that, like, to take it to its logical ends, you would be in favor of shutting down people like MLK, because MLK, what he was doing was illegal. We recognize that. Like, it was illegal, and it was deemed like immoral by some people at the time, especially those who were up top. But largely, his movement was very popular by the people, and he broke laws against that he thought were immoral. I understand that, he suffered consequences for that. He went to prison. That's where the famous letter from Birmingham jail comes from jail. Like, the man suffered consequences, but for doing the right thing. And I advocate for people taking the consequences if it means doing the right thing. It might not be an ideal outcome, but it is better than just sitting there and watching and actually even committing towards that end goal that the person might have, whether it's segregation then or deportation now.
So with that, it's not just the guidelines. Like, people here, our soldiers, they're not just obeying the guidelines our government set for them. They're obeying the international guidelines the United Nations and the International Criminal Courts has set for them. And the same applies for law enforcement. If law enforcement here is ordered to commit a war crime, and they do, they'll be held responsible one way or another.
What do you mean by one way or another?
We have international criminal courts, we have Interpol, we have people who just really hate war crimes in general and will take care of them themselves, one way or another.
That only works, though, if you extradite. That only works if the UN is able to actually do their job. And that only works if the system finds itself guilty, right? Because they go before a military court, the MCJ or something like that. I forget what the abbreviation is exactly, but it's a military court run by people who are in the military. And like, again, it's the problem of internal checking, right? I wouldn't trust the FBI to investigate the FBI. I would trust a different organization to trust the FBI, like maybe the CIA or a congressional committee, right? I would trust those people more than the FBI itself, right? Because I don't know about you, but I live in rural Michigan. Over here, our police are very corrupt. And it's not in a way that you might think where it's like, oh, officer, I want to take the ticket. Here's $100. It's more so like, oh, I know you. You're Chuck's cousin, right? I'll let you off, right? Because I know you, Chuck's cousin or whatever, right? There's a massive corruption problem here where, especially in police departments, if it's a familial thing, like if your father was a police officer, you can get away with more things than someone who might be a first-time police officer. Like, let's say you act indecently towards a citizen when you're doing an arrest, right? You might get a way lighter sentence or punishment, rather, if you are like a police officer who has connections than someone who doesn't. It's internal investigations that are a problem. That's why federal or even state level troopers are actually trained specifically for investigating local departments, because local departments tend to be more corrupt when they do their internal investigations.
So let me ask you this. You know that this problem's happening. Do you have any evidence?
Yeah, I could give you...
if you have evidence of this happening, I don't want the evidence. Give it to your police department. Give it to your state police.
Well, that's
because we have a system. We have a system that will provide justice. If your local police department can't handle this properly, the state police department will. If the state police department can't handle it properly, The federal police will. And
Well,
if
sure,
the
this is
federal
a-
police don't handle
yeah.
it properly, if the federal agency doesn't handle it properly, I'm sure the Supreme Courts and the people are more than willing to hear this.
Well, what we're talking about is something that's very hard to prove in the first place, because you have to prove that somebody has a favorable connection to somebody else to the point where it's hindering their judgment when making decisions on whether to punish them or not, or even the severity of the punishment, right? You have to prove that was influencing it. So it's very hard to do that. I can give you the statistics that show that this is a problem, but it is very hard to actually look at like actual like physical proof beyond just like testimony and like like people who have spoken up from police departments who behave in a way like that. It's very hard to prove that sort of thing.
So these people who have spoken up, have they used our system? Have they made a report? And has justice been given to these people that they reported?
No, a lot of times they don't, because a lot of the times police departments tend to be connected to your judges. So let's say Chief Bob knows Judge Judy, because why not? Bob might bribe Judy or offer or like send a word to Judy, be like, hey Judy, really like your dress. Anyway, I think that Bob Jr. here made a mistake. My poor boy, he didn't mean to cuss out that civilian. Okay, it sucks, but like, maybe give him 3 days with pay, 3-day leave with pay. And Judge Judy goes, I'll consider it, maybe. Like, that's very hard to prove, right? And like the proof that it even happened in the first place. But then when you get to the court, the defense and the prosecution are oblivious to it, right? Unless the chief goes off and tells his son, which would be stupid. But either way, right? You get my point. Like, corruption can absolutely destroy a system. I'm not saying that happens often. It's a very rare situation, but it's very possible. And it happens all the time.
Yeah, it 100% can, and I won't deny it. Everyone has schema coming into it, and as a law enforcement officer, your whole job should be keeping your schema and your personal bias outside of your job. That's of utmost importance when in law enforcement. However, I'm looking up statistics. I can't find anything that says that internal investigation reports, especially for police departments, normally end with serious violations going unpunished. Major U.S. cities have been found to have this, but majority of the time it's handled properly.
Okay, I want to bring up Vaughn now, because Vaughn says that they have some corrections to the arguments.
Okay, so I just want to correct a few different things that have been stated here. First off, there's never the idea that there's always like some other institution to hold this institution accountable. Not true at all. The U.S. isn't actually a signatory to the ICC and does not turn over people to the ICC. In fact, we have laws against that in some circumstances. So there isn't just always someone holding someone accountable. Yeah, that happens sometimes, but it literally depends on a maze of rules, regulations, and political decisions. So that just wanted to clarify that. So things aren't just because there's international institutions and they exist, and there's other factors doesn't mean they have jurisdiction or are going to get jurisdiction. Having higher authorities like Interpol or whatever doesn't mean things are corrected. Now, sometimes things are corrected depending on what happens, like local police forces. The DOJ does investigate those depending on the rules they have to follow, the civil rights laws and how they're written and what authority they get based upon that, and what the civil rights decision is doing. It's been kind of gutted, so it's probably not very likely it's going to investigate a lot of stuff in the near future. But depending on the circumstances and the laws and the people enforcing it, yeah, they can be investigated. That was one thing I just wanted to correct. The other thing I wanted to point out was is that the way Water is describing the system, like it doesn't, whether or not someone thinks something is morally wrong or not, the government doesn't get to, individual workers in the government don't get to decide that it's morally wrong and they're going to disobey it. Like in civil disobedience, they basically have to resign to send a message saying, I don't like this, right? They can't just true. They can't just, if the Supreme Court has constitutionally bound something and said this is the law, they don't get to just be like, well, the president says that I should do this, the Supreme Court says it's legal, but I think it's wrong, so I'm just not going to do this, right?
You absolutely can. You're just going to face heavy consequences.
They can, but they're just going to get fired the next day, and we already saw people do this. and they just get fired the next day. So a lot of them just resign, say, I don't like this.
Sure.
Okay.
But that's better than aiding and abetting a system or an
Also-
idea that you disagree with.
Sure, but you're also implying that there's a common sense belief that this is unconstitutional, which a lot of people would disagree with you. So you can't just assume that, my argument of my belief that this is unconstitutional mean everyone else should agree and not do something immoral. Well, lots of people probably think, hey, this isn't a violation of the Fourth Amendment, and we should do it because it's okay, right?
Sure,
Like for every person. So I think I get what you're saying, but I think your assumption that there's some common morality or that this isn't debatable allows I can even point to the Supreme Court justice and say, hey, he thinks this isn't against the Fourth Amendment. So I'm sure there's tons of citizens who agree with him and are going to serve in ICE. So, I would just point that out, and they're serving in ICE, and they're like, well, yeah, I agree with Kavanaugh's interpretation of the Constitution. Just because you think this doesn't mean people. I mean, if someone disagrees with it, sure, they can resign. But I would just point out there's going to be more than enough people willing to serve in ICE who agree with Kavanaugh on the morality or legality of masks. Maybe there's less people on the question of racial program, but there's probably a bunch of people who believe in that too,
Sure, and I would say for those who don't believe in it, either go on strike, protest, or resign. I feel like those are all fair options that nobody would judge you for if you were to do it. Because if you genuinely believe that it is racial profiling and that it is an evil act to do what you are doing, you should not do that thing. I think we could all agree on that. I'm not saying it's undebatable or it's not applicable to like the Supreme Court. Obviously it is. There was a debate in the Supreme Court over it. I just happen to agree with the losing side in the Supreme Court. When it comes to generally socially, I believe people are on my side, but I mean, I would hope so.
Would you also say that every time someone thinks something's uncut, do you think all the federal agents who disagree with Supreme Court rulings should just resign every time the Supreme Court enacts a ruling they don't like or thinks immoral?
That's why I said protest, strike, or resign.
But wait. If law enforcement did this every time, if like half the police officers that they don't like law regulations, we would just have consistent chaos throughout the country, right? Every time Congress passed some controversial bill thing or Supreme Court made some controversial decision, you would just have mass resignations in law enforcement. Don't you think that would? Do you think a country could function in that sort? If every law was up to the veto of the conscience of law enforcement, don't you think that would be cause some problem?
I would rather have that kind of system than a system where police obediently follow the state completely and utterly to the end, to the point where it could lead to something like
But do you think there's like questions of like levels of like, so we'd say maybe probably this is wrong, right? But there's like a lot of regulations which we'd say is wrong. Do you think there's like a line where they'd be like, okay, if we're like Nazi Germany, like executing Jews or something like that, yeah, they'd probably do that. But do you think you have something? Here's something that's like debatable constitutionally that some people think is a constitutional and moral, some people don't, right? Like this is something everyone agrees with. So I mean, don't you see the difference?
I mean, people also were debating about slavery, but we had to fight a war over that. Like, I understand what you're saying. I understand what you're saying, where it's debatable. It's not a common consensus. But the problem is that the significance, right? There are two factors that go into it for me. If I was a Supreme Court justice, for example, I was taking into consideration, I would take into consideration the importance and the popularity of said decision. Obviously, legality too.
But it's not their job. They shouldn't care about popularity.
They should. They're the Supreme Court, because the whole point of the Supreme Court is to enforce laws. Laws are proposed by Congress, who represent the majority of the people, or at least that's typically how it works.
Congress is a popularity Congress. The Supreme Court's job is just to interpret the laws. Congress.
Who are the laws made by?
Congress, not the Supreme Court.
Yes. So Congress, who represents the people and represents the majority opinion in most cases, is that's the law. The law is a law of majority in that situation. So when the Supreme Court is looking to uphold or not uphold a decision, they are looking at whether it is a law that most people would agree with, it's a law that would be applicable. I literally just said it. If Congress is making a law that is, if Congress is, go on.
Well, why is Congress can make a law. The Supreme Court's job is to say if it's constitutional or if some regulation is prohibited by under law when they're interpreting the some other statutes. Their job is not to care at all about the popularity of the law, right? If all Americans want to ban flag burning tomorrow, and Congress pass a law against flag burning, the first job is not to say, hey, you know what? I think about the First Amendment, but people really like it, so we should just keep it, right? Like, that is not. Why do you think that's their job?
Well, no. So the popularity part plays more so into like the striking part, where it's like, if I was in the Supreme Court, to clarify, like I should have clarified for the rulings, it's definitely it should be about strictly like legality and whether it is allowed or like in the spirit of the law. But when it comes to like protesting or like speaking out against those things, I would say those are the three considerations. I should have clarified that. That's on me.
Oh, okay.
I agree with you, right? If the Supreme Court, like, slavery was legal for a long time, and it was popular for a long damn time. I mean, it wasn't unconstitutional per se, but like if there was, like, for example, the I forget what the amendment is. I think it's the 14th Amendment that prohibits slavery. And they looked at it and said, well, the South still wants it, and some people still want it, so it's still technically popular. I'm not gonna I'm going to advise Congress not to, that would be egregious. I would agree with that.
I mean, it sounds like you want a law enforcement veto over laws that people think are immoral. And I would point out that by this metric, you would probably have not seen desegregation occur because you just have all the southern states law enforcement go on strike. And then if the FBI feels, we shouldn't desegregate because it's full of white supremacists, they should just go on strike and just say, let's keep it segregation. Like, your metric of people of leaving things up to law enforcement is a little dangerous because there's all sorts of law enforcement that might support policies you don't agree with.
Well, and those
alternative, they think it's immoral.
All right.
Anyway, I'm done. I'm sorry. That was all I want to say. I'm done. That was my last point to make. Thank you, Mas.
Of course. All right.
So as a quick, can I respond to that really quick? Okay, thank you. I would say that my system, where the police are striking and protesting against segregation, is a better system than, again, the alternative that we're discussing, which is that the police are enforcing segregation. I feel like that's infinitely worse, right? I would rather, again, not be part of something that's evil than be a part of something that's evil.
And that's what's so beautiful with this country. There's no forced conscription to be in law enforcement.
Exactly. That's why you're allowed
to resign. If you believe a law is immoral, and you believe that your belief of how immoral that law is, then you can just decide not to be in law enforcement. I mean, I don't disagree. I don't 100% agree with every single law in the penal law code. However, I'm still going to enforce it because it's written down there. It's written down in our books. Doing this is really illegal. You shouldn't do it, and you'll go to jail for it. Additionally, for your whole thing of how legislative picks and then the judiciary branch oversees, it's middle school grade knowledge of how our government works with all its checks and balances and how our system works. Our system is made to prevent what you fear from coming to happen, because it's not just you who fears it, it's many other people. The people who made this system were afraid of having another king. The people who updated the system were afraid of fascists or communists becoming so extreme and violently taking power, and then using it to do violent and terrible things. The system was updated constantly through history, and that's what makes this country so great. Our system prevents what you fear.
I really don't know where this American exceptionalism comes from, especially when we look at, because what you're saying has been said before in the Weimar Republic. The problem is that when people act outside of the system, that's when you have to worry. So when people don't abide by the rules of the game. Like if we're both playing Monopoly, right, and you grab all the money from the bank, and you just take it and say, yes, this is how I want to play Monopoly, we're not operating on the same game. We're not playing on a fair ground, right?
That's why law enforcement exists.
No. What I'm saying is that even though law enforcement exists, if someone were to operate outside of that premise where law enforcement is able to detain people, let's say someone does a military coup and the police are too scared to go against them, right? That would be an example of where our system has failed because they have operated outside of the system. We are unable to stop them. Like, it's not to say that is going to happen, but I'm like, for example, Hitler worked outside of the system. He used paramilitaries to get his way, to eventually bully people into voting for him. And eventually it became so popular that he was able to become basically president. That's what I'm saying, is that like he worked outside the system, and there are other actors who work outside of the system in the United States to cause harm to this democracy.
So for your military coup example, we do have a system for dealing with that too. We have military police. They're still moderated. The military is very closely moderated. Because if you commit a murder and you're in the military, you're not just facing a court case in public courts where you get a life sentence. You're going to have to go through a military court, which is going to give you additional punishment.
I mean, yeah, sure, but again, you're assuming that they're not in with the coup. Like I'm operating under the idea that they are working as a coherent, like, let's say the military just unanimously agrees on this particular thing and they're all in support of the coup, right? It's never gonna happen. But let's say it is the case, right? We would be fucked. If we're operating in the system, we'd be fucked because they're operating outside of the system, right? Like, if I go back to Monopoly, let's say we agree on the basic rules of Monopoly, right? And we agree this time, no money stealing, okay? If you steal money from the bank, can't play Monopoly anymore, okay? Fair. Then you pull out an extra pair of dice and say, well, I'm just using this because, I'm just allowed to, because I want to. And I don't have to operate within the law to have these dice. And it's like, well, I can't really stop you. You have double the dice, that gives you double the income, hypothetically, right? That's not fair at all, I understand what you're saying. I just think that you're thinking the naivety of this could never happen in our system because our American system is perfect, or at least it's good enough to prevent this type of thing from happening. But this has been said before in countries that were overrun by fascists, communists, and the like.
Okay, so for the military coup example, you literally said it can never happen.
I meant the military being universally on board. So
exactly.
we could say, though, that a regiment disagrees, as opposed to the entire let's say the Space Force disagrees. Okay, I don't think the Space Force is going to be able to stop the other 5 branches of military, right? There's going to be a split for sure. Just what matters is how big the split is.
Okay, so let's say the Marines go off the deep end. They become the MAGA Marines. They serve only Trump. There is 4 other branches to take care of them. There is multiple people in the Marines who wouldn't agree with them. There is a massive system to ensure that people with very extreme beliefs cannot get into this and then build this whole rebellion thing overnight. It is so incredibly difficult to siege our system from the outside. And I'm not saying it's a perfect system. Nothing is perfect. By default, it's fragile, but we can add onto it and we can fix it and we can keep building onto it. From 249 years ago when this whole experiment started, and for the foreseeable future.
Sure, it just feels very naive. I understand, I get it. It's just you're putting so much faith in the system. When systems fail, every system fails at a certain point, right? I believe that our system is the best, but doesn't make it, it doesn't even make it good. It just means that it's the best of what's available, right? It's kind of the thing where you have to look to historical examples in order to understand why I'm saying the things I'm saying. Right, this could be a doom or take or whatever, but historically this has been what's happened. Like in the August coup in 1991, obviously not a liberal system in the Soviet Union though, but the military was split on whether the USSR should continue to be a communist country or if it should split off into a more democratic federation. The military was split. People were split. There were paramilitaries forming all around to try and prevent the coup, and ultimately the coup failed. But that's just demonstrating how the military was incredibly split on that. And what happened in the end was that the USSR dissolved. It ended. It was gone. Donezo. The end. And that's a system that we would probably say has more security than ours, because they trade off more liberty than for security, right? They have less liberties in their system in exchange for more security from the state. And even then, their security forces were not able to prevent what would become the dissolution of the USSR. It's a little bit of a tangent, but I hope you understand what I mean, though, right? Is that every system is bound to fail at some point. Every political career ends in failure.
The difference between the system behind the USSR and the system behind America is that America could build and add on as it went. I think this is the point we're missing. Say you become president, you have your own political party, and a majority of that political party is in Congress. You can pass and build onto our system, and it will be a slow process as it's meant to be in order to ensure you don't add 50 amendments that suddenly make you God of the universe. There's a reason for why everything's so slow. But you can slowly add to our system and build to our system and make it, shape it more to what you believe would help. And someone else may disagree with you, and that's all right. That's why America is so great. someone else may disagree with you and offer a change. And that's why we have this system. It's not just adding on to it. Not like just adding on clay. It's also you're constantly molding it.
I mean, like the Soviets did make quite a bit of progress, but that's neither here nor there. I realize if we continue down this, it'll be very soon a communism versus liberalism debate, which I'm sure we are not ready for again. I believe we're already like 2 hours into this, so yeah, I was gonna say probably not.
We're 2 hours in. I was gonna go ahead and bring a Bam Bam XCI because he's been waiting very patiently in the chat and has had a lot to say in the chat. I feel like we're getting somewhere with this conversation, but maybe Bam Bam here.
Oh.
Bam Bam, who's your question?
I have a few. Well, one's about the masked ICE and then the drug cartel boat bombings. ICE wears masks because we've had multiple incidents in the past where they've been killed or hunted down by either cartel or individuals who had vendettas against them.
Sure.
And we've seen it now. The moment somebody's identity gets leaked, they're targeted either socially or just violently, publicly. So I just don't see where the idea that we don't need masks is coming from.
Sure. So the idea is from public accountability. Even though these people do face greater dangers compared to regular law enforcement due to the nature of what they're doing and how they're doing it, they still have signed up for this role. They signed up for this task and responsibility. And that task and responsibility comes with danger. We cannot maximize the security of our police while also ensuring the liberties that we are entailed in the Constitution, for example. Right? This is why the police is restricted and put on a leash. Right, we hold the leash. It just depends on how much leeway we're willing to give our dog, aka the law enforcement. Not saying that law enforcement are dogs, but I hope you you get what I mean.
Well, even then, they do have a right to some sort of safety. They don't have the right to feel safe, but they have a right to some sort of safety, protection, and privacy.
Well, no, they don't have a right to feel safe. Nobody has a right to.
They have a right to privacy. They have the right to
they have a right to privacy,
safety, and privacy.
Right, but never to a right to feel safe. That's never been a right.
Safe. But the right to privacy and the right to their own safety would still imply that they have the ability to cover up their masking and identifying features. The military is allowed to do this too.
No. That wouldn't apply. No, I think what you're describing is would open the door massive. Like it wouldn't even open the door. You'd open the door, step through it, close the door behind you. You just make a secret police state at that point. Because if you really want these people to feel safe, if you really want them to be safe in private, you would just hide their identities. You wouldn't have badge numbers. You wouldn't have any of these fucking civilian institutions. They have a way to
be identified, but
they do. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying that's a good thing. But what it sounds like what you're saying is that they should take an extra step to protect their privacy, which would
they have a right.
In fact, they'll hurt the rights. I understand they have a right to protect their privacy, but not in this situation. No.
I agree with you with some part about the mask, but for completely different reasons. It's mostly coming from the self-defense ability. Because if you're carrying a gun as a citizen, you can't wear a mask. And that's where I disagree.
Yeah. Do you think that police operate as public servants?
Yeah.
Okay. So what makes someone a public servant if their entire identity is private?
The fact
if someone is the fact that they're acting
as a public servant.
How can you act as a public? How can you act as a public servant when you are a private entity?
You have a right to privacy as a public servant.
That's not the question I asked you.
You're misconstruing public as in everybody should know their identity. That's not how it's been, nor has it ever been that case.
Sure. Can you answer the question of how can you be a public servant
You're there physically
while acting as a private entity?
It's as simple as that. You're upholding public norms and public safety.
So if I was a masked officer that refused to give out my badge number or any sort of identification, and
they do have to give you your badge.
No. I just say it's a hypothetical. It's a hypothetical. Okay, calm down. If I was an officer and I refused to give my identification, and I'm wearing a mask, there's no way to identify me. Am I still a public servant?
No, then you're acting in a way that goes against what you're supposed to do.
Okay.
You're violating the guidelines. You can't be removed from there.
You don't have to show your face.
Yeah, sure. So we would agree on that then. Okay, we would agree that there was a point where you are no longer a public servant. Because just being there isn't enough, right? You have to be in service of the public, right?
But you don't have to show your face or an identifying feature. There's methods.
But you have to identify yourself. Yeah, you have to identify yourself in some way.
You have to identify as your badge number. Yes.
Right, and
then that goes through.
What has happened to a lot of people who have asked for badge numbers?
If they get denied, then they can file a report.
They're told that they are obstructing justice is usually what happens, and they get pepper sprayed. That's what happened to that lady in Washington.
And that's illegal.
It is illegal, but there was no internal investigation about it. guy
There
got.
is internal investigations. If they're
No, there
reported.
wasn't. Not for that one.
If they
No.
report it,
If they report it, it was reported. Nothing
it was
happened to the
reported by the
officer.
person
There was
who
no
happened to
court.
them.
You're calling
Yes.
me.
Well, no, because they have their own internal courts.
Yep. So that's what I'm
And
saying.
It's not
is that
done.
there's
It's not
yep.
done by the organization. It's not done by the people who did it. It's done by a separate entity within the organization.
So it's the same entity. It's just different layers of that entity.
It's a different entity within
No,
the same layer.
it's not. So you're confusing
it's
different
not-
layers
no.
for different entities.
No, when
Okay.
they do a private investigation, because then, like the FBI, if they investigate themselves, they have a completely different part of the FBI that does those investigations.
Sure, I would rather trust the CIA or a different organization to look at that different entity. Because the way I view it is that why would the FBI investigate the FBI?
why-
That makes
well,
no sense.
because-
I would rather have the CIA investigate the FBI because
I'd
the CIA
rather
doesn't have a
organization
Then
common.
it's going to take
The
longer,
American
cost more
people
money, and be
all
less.
the
I don't
time.
care if it costs longer, it takes more money, or is less efficient. I care about justice.
If it's less
That's what we
efficient,
should
it's
care
more
about
likely
in
not
this
going to
fucking
provide
country.
justice.
No, what do you mean by efficient?
If they can't
I
navigate,
think- yeah.
because the FBI and the CIA do things completely different ways. We've seen this in their leak when they unclassify files. They organize them in completely different ways.
That's not relevant.
It's way easier to have somebody that's more familiar with the system, who is specifically meant to investigate that system.
So I'm sure
than
that a
having a
CIA
complete
officer would probably be pretty familiar with, the law. I feel like that's a given. So I
Not
feel like
the way
it would
they
be pretty,
document
I
their
feel like it would be. I feel like it would be
They
pretty
don't-
fair to say that a CIA officer could look at an instance where the FBI is mistreating a civilian and say, "Yup, that probably was pretty bad." I might redact files a different way. I might use a black highlighter instead of the proper means, but I can still tell that that was a gross
I'm not talking
misuse
about
of force.
redacting stuff. I'm talking about
I know,
the way
I
they
know.
file their paperwork.
I well aware.
'Cause
Okay,
if they
I
don't have any,
guarantee.
if they don't
I
have any
guarantee.
video,
Yeah.
that is how it's done.
So if you have, for example, a team in the CIA, I wonder if this is actually true. I guarantee that there is. Maybe not in the CIA, but in other words, that there is a team of people who are specially trained to deal with internal corruption within the FBI, who are specialized in how the FBI documents their papers and how they file those reports and how they manage their evidence. I guarantee that's the case. And I can look it up real quick. Actually, let's see if that is the case, because I guarantee it is. Is there a section of the CIA that is tasked with oversight regarding the FBI? Yes, there is. There's a section of the CIA that's tasked with oversight regarding the FBI. So
I never said there wasn't.
I didn't say you didn't say it was. But what I'm saying is that what you're saying is that you would do the FBI. But they're actually, in our system, we have what I'm saying, where a different entity comes, a different organization comes in and does that.
I prefer the entity that's within the system to do it, but that's mostly down to what I know about it. But
Well,
How did we get here? I was fucking around for the last couple minutes.
you're good. We were talking about what makes someone a public servant, and then we ended up
it was mass.
here.
They serve the public.
Sure, they save the public, or serve for public. Sure, until they don't. When they do unpopular policy, it does not serve the public. It does not help the
No,
public
okay,
welfare.
another thing.
And they're violating
idea
the
that it's
guidelines.
unpopular isn't necessarily true.
It is absolutely true.
No,
I mean,
it was the popular
yeah.
vote. He ran on this. So the
No,
idea that he is
no.
the unpopular
You
candidate-
don't. No. We're not talking about the popular vote because people voted in that election for many different things. They voted on the economy. They voted on
then you would see
immigration.
his approval
They
rating
voted on
dropping
gender
by a
care.
few
They voted on
percent.
different. They voted on Israel. They voted on a lot of things. But if you look at polls, which specifically ask about immigration, these policies are not popular with the
But
American.
what
people.
cities are they done in? How many people?
It doesn't matter. We look at the
does
country as a
matter.
whole. It's a government of the country.
They don't look at the country as a whole. They
I
take a
love
small
that
sample
law
size and then they
People
project
in
it.
New fucking
law
York don't live in the
enforcement.
country.
They take a small sample size. They don't do every single citizen.
Of
don't do
course
every
they don't.
single country.
You can't ask
I mean, every single
350 million people a question.
But they
That's
usually don't even
incredibly
ask
unfeasible.
350.
Yes, they do.
those
You
polls.
must look at really poor. You probably look at Fox News.
I'm
if that's
just,
where you're
I'm
getting it
just
from.
using from what I have seen from people presenting that argument.
Do you watch Fox News? Is that where you get these
No,
like
I don't watch
50
Fox
sample
News.
size? Okay, thank Lord. Okay, I usually look at surveys that have at least 500,000 people when it comes to national like consensus. Or not
Where were they
consensus.
done?
Sorry, huh?
And where were they done?
The United States of America.
Okay, that's not very specific. What city were
I-
they done? What state?
It does. I mean, it's a broad. I
It
mean, I
does
can
matter.
pull up a study and we can
Well,
go through it if you want. If you want to speculate about, know,
There's no need to go.
they're
through
all
any of it.
liberals. They're all liberals from LA. You know.
That's not what I'm saying.
Well, that's what you're implying. Is that where did they do the
I'm
cities?
implying
And
that
if I were
most
to
of
say
these
LA,
are-
then yeah.
Most studies.
Some liberals taking
both
my
sides.
gun.
Here, let's do how
But,
popular is deportation. We can go through a study that you want.
I mean, again, amongst the Mexican population, I know this. It's way more popular than most sites or most studies claim it to be.
All right, here we go. So, for instance, 83% of Americans agree that we should deport immigrants who have been convicted of a violent crime, while 43% support deporting all undocumented migrants. So, what I'm saying...
Wait, how many agreed with deporting people who have committed a crime?
A violent crime, 83%. Let's see. Let's pull up the article exactly.
Why did this become a Trump debate? I thought it was about law enforcement.
I mean, wait, we're talking about law enforcement now. We're talking about the how popular it is and how law enforcement are public servants and ought to act in the public interest and in the defense of the public welfare.
Okay, I guess Bam Bam, is there anything else that you'd like to...
Yeah, the idea that we can't detect fentanyl or other illicit substance on a plane or on a boat isn't really substantiated. In fact, it's the opposite usually.
Did anyone make that?
You said that we blew up a narco boat without knowing if there were drugs on it.
Yes.
We blew it
My
up.
understanding,
We've had electrical optical systems that can detect that kind of stuff since roughly the 90s.
So, from my understanding, I don't think it was ever confirmed. I don't think there's ever been a press
They'll never
release
confirm
that
it
actually.
because
I know they'll never confirm it because it was evil. I guarantee it. I guarantee if you look at the actual
because
documents
the moment
confirming
you
it, I
confirm
guarantee
your
it wasn't.
capabilities on the world stage like that, you let everybody know exactly how much you can
You
do.
just said that you knew the capabilities.
I'm saying no. We know that they can. We don't know how far they can. We don't know.
You just said it. You just said it.
Yes, we
It
know they
clearly
can.
is like it's the worst kept secret in American history. If you know it.
No. What I'm saying is.
Fuck you mean no?
Okay, have
You
you
say
ever
that
seen
it's secret.
Have you ever seen a declassified video?
Quite a few, yeah.
Do you know they're always in 140p, right? Do you think that's actually what it looks like to the people who have it?
Hominid.
The raw footage.
I'm not looking at the video when it comes to this.
I'm
Like,
saying,
let's use your example. Let's use your example of optics that can detect drugs from
no,
distance.
that's not what I'm talking about when it comes to why
that
would they
was what you were talking
if
about.
They could, no, I'm talking about from how far they can detect it. Everybody knows you can detect the signature of chemicals like that.
Mm.
Otherwise, chemical weapons would be just the rage because you can't fucking detect them. But the idea that we can't detect them from hundreds of miles away just...
Well, the drone wasn't hundreds of miles away. It was tens at most, I think. I think it was not even a mile away.
Probably detect it was probably several hundred aircraft.
Probably not, if I had to guess. It probably was from a tip that made its way to the fucking DEA.
Maybe it was.
Probably got to that. A few dozen kilometer distance.
Yeah, but even then, you have to confirm it, and usually that doesn't happen within that close of it.
Yep, and that's why. But also the lack of transparency on it is why I think there is a house.
They're not going to be transparent. That just never happens with the military.
Do you
military
think
doesn't
that's
answer to the Congress?
You think that no? They absolutely do. What the fuck are you talking about? Hold on a minute.
They don't have to tell the capabilities of their actions to Congress. They don't.
No, yes, they do. They just can't.
No, they don't.
It doesn't have to be declassified. Do you what?
No,
what
they do not have to tell them the full capabilities of what.
Yes,
they're doing.
they do.
No, they don't. Otherwise, the F-22 program and the F-35 program would have never existed. We saw this.
I'm so sorry. What role do you think the Army plays in our society or in our government?
They only have to tell them the bare minimum. That's it.
No, that wasn't the question. The question was, what role do you think the Army plays in government or society? Whichever one.
Homeland Defense. That's it.
Homeland Defense. Okay.
The Congress
who are they beholden to? Better question. Who are they? Sure. Who are they beholden to?
To the American people.
And who are the American people represented by?
The state representatives.
Who are in
the House of Representatives.
Yep, which is part of
Congress.
Good job. Okay, so we got there.
They don't have to tell them everything.
They are answered to Congress. They answer to Congress. They are beholden to Congress for funding, and they have to pass an audit from the Pentagon, which explains where all of their funding goes. You don't understand the military. Don't pretend to know what the military is. Okay, I don't know why you're saying that the military is a super secret entity when you can go to Congress right now. If you become a congressman, if you become a state representative,
they only tell them what they ask for, and that's the bare minimum.
If you become a state representative and you request that this gets released, you can have that happen.
Yeah, if I request it. Most Congress doesn't request that kind of information.
Exactly. That's why I believe there's a House committee, or let me see.
But they don't have to tell them if they don't ask.
No, if they don't ask, yes, you're right. But they do have to tell them if they ask, correct?
Yeah, they need to know.
So this has been requested before, specifically regarding the optics, right?
And it was released. No, the capabilities of the optics has not been really. No, the capabilities of the device that detected it has not been requested. It was simply requested if they knew if it was on there, which was confirmed.
Of course.
All right, Bam Bam.
Protect
Is there anything else?
No, that's
I think we'll wrap this up. Thank you for coming on a stage. For you two guys, I'll set a 10-minute timer, and we'll keep it open for 10 more minutes so you guys can kind of get down to the points of things, and then we'll do closings right after that. So the 10-minute timer starts now.
Was there anything you wanted to talk about regarding that past section, DTV, or?
Just the points I want to highlight, because that went a lot of places, many of which didn't really cover law enforcement. Somehow we got into double tapping the boat. But my key points and takeaways I want to give this is law enforcement faces too much criticism. People point the blame at the wrong people most of the time. Those who do point the finger at the right people sometimes don't understand the systems in place that police departments have to make sure we have everyone abiding by our guidelines and ensuring that there is safety for everyone. And I believe that's really all I have here.
Sure. I would agree, right? There are definitely stupid people who try to talk about things that they don't know about all the time. Like the gentleman who just came up, but like I mean, like, sure, I guess like it still was fair though that people, when they see something they think is wrong, to say, this is wrong, I feel like that's pretty fair. Even if they're wrong, I'd at least appreciate that they are willing to say they're wrong. But beyond that, yeah, I don't got much else.
All right, well then we'll just go, I guess, into closings. So, DTV, you did it first when we opened, right? You did the first opening, so we'll give Water the first 5-minute closing.
All right, thank you. As public servants of the United States of America, police should be beholden to the people. And as a result, when policy is passed that is unpopular and betrays the American people, betrays the public welfare, the common good, and the ideals that we stand for as a republic, we should be opposed to that whenever possible. And thus, we should have a high level of scrutiny for our law enforcement officers. It does not make sense to me when people say, for example, that certain institutions should not be beholden to Congress. The only way that this should be true is if the United States was a dictatorship where the army was not beholden to the people, where the army served the state, where the army served a figurehead of state as opposed to the people. Thus, it only seems fair that we hold the level of criticism that we do have in the United States for these officers. When people video officers and ICE agents taking people from their homes in the middle of the night, I feel like that's how the system should operate. There should be multiple systems to check when people do bad things. It is the only way to preserve American democracy, to preserve our liberties and our values. We cannot trust one institution to do this job. That's why we have checks and balances, and we've always had checks and balances in some way, shape, or form. It has been constantly developing throughout the existence of our republic. It is fundamental to the founding fathers' ideas and the Constitution that we cherish and value. Thus, I think it is not only acceptable, but is obligation of the American citizen to put himself or herself in the position to scrutinize law enforcement where it is applicable and justified.
All right, DTV, your 5-minute timer starts now.
Anger against law enforcement comes from a misunderstanding or lack of knowledge to the systems and rules and guidelines law enforcement has, who made those guidelines, and understanding how law enforcement works. Criticism is good. Violence, obstruction, or abuse of the law and law enforcement is not. The system America has ensures we limit our mistakes. I trust our system to do what is best for the American people. I trust our system to make sure our politicians stay in the interest of a majority of American people, at least most of the time. I believe that law enforcement is necessary and receives too much hatred and anger that at times ensures that it gets halted in its progress. Like where we see ICE agents not even able to leave detention facilities, where we see people throwing rocks, at law enforcement agents, where we see people violently resisting law enforcement and violently making plans. Recently, I want to point this case out. The FBI stopped 4 people from bombing multiple locations on New Year's Eve in an attempt to cripple ICE and logistics infrastructure in Southern California. Had law enforcement not intervened, there would have been tons of civilian casualties and people hurt because they were targeting public New Year's events. That's when law enforcement works correctly, and I doubt most of people have heard that. The news makes the negatives of law enforcement very well.
Oh, he froze. This is a great face to freeze on, too. Oh my goodness. Oh Lord. Hello?
My shit bugged out.
You're good.
That is such an L moment on my aura. Oh my god. Okay. Let me wrap that up.
2:45 left.
All right, what was I talking about? Oh, news tends to point out that one stupid guy who makes a mistake and how that case was completely mishandled. And a majority of the time, those events are in a very, very small minority. A vast majority of the time, our system works. And our system still works. If you disagree with something our politicians do, you can vote them out. If you disagree with a certain rule or call the Supreme Court has made, you can challenge it. You can have it re-reviewed. If you don't like a president, you can vote legislation and vote Congress members that will kick him out. There is so many systems in place to ensure the majority of the people are heard. And these same systems apply to law enforcement. You can, if you see something that you don't agree with, you can make a request and have it changed in law enforcement. That's all I got.
Alrighty. Just want to thank both of you guys once again for coming and doing this debate. Water as always. DTV, I would love to have you back for more debates at some point.
Was this mic's quality better or worse?
The mic quality's been pretty solid. At least I think so.
Alright. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, miss.
I hope you enjoyed that debate. If you did, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to come debate yourself, join the server. Link is down in the description. But for now, that's all I have for you. Goodbye.